And here we go. So today's topic is, as the first thing has suggested, papers, and specifically, and how to write them for this class. All right. How many of you have gotten a paper assignment before in which you read over the assignment and still didn't understand what the hell you were supposed to do? Has that happened? Yeah, I'm sure it's happened. I certainly had it happen. Yeah, so why are we doing this is basically because I want to make sure that this class is not one of the ones where when you finish reading this over, you have no idea what it was I was asking. So I just gave you a long set of paper prompts. You may still somewhat be in confusion as to what it is I'm asking you to do. So that's why we're going to spend this entire class talking about what it is that I'm looking for in paper writing. And hopefully this stuff applies more generally to going about and writing papers for other classes. Because sad fact of the matter is, many professors, high school teachers will have you write papers, and not many of us take the time to actually pause and bring up the question of why are we asking you to write this? What is it we're looking for, and why is it important? And I think it's useful to talk about these things instead of just taking it for granted. Because while it might for me seem obvious why I want you to write a paper, for you as the student, if I don't ever come out and say it, it can be confusing, it can feel overwhelming, and it can end up doing more harm than good in the long term for your ability to learn things and your self-confidence and everything else. So I want to spend this class just talking about paper writing in general, and also a specific type of paper writing, which I'll be looking for in this class. So first off, just really open-ended question. Why is it that teachers want you to write papers? What's the point of it? It's clearly like, I mean, one theory would be that we want to torture you, but while there are some sadistic teachers, most of us aren't trying to torture you. And while there are some people who really like grading, most of us don't love sitting down with a stack of 80 papers and having to grade them. So why is it then that we want you to write papers? And I'm literally opening it up to you all. What is the reason that you think? So I want to know your opinion. And so part of it is I do genuinely want to know what you think on a topic. But why in a paper format? Why don't I just ask you? Why don't I just say, what's your opinion on this? What is it about the act of paper writing? And as Joel said, it's a good question. And it's a good question because not a lot of time do teachers actually talk about why it's important. Well, yeah, so how well you can analyze topics. So one thing is it's a way of testing what you've learned in the class. It's basically another form of testing, and specifically, how well can you put things in your own words? So it's a way of testing how well you can understand something. Because generally speaking, how many of you have had the experience where you thought you understood something, and then your friend asked you to explain it to them, and you suddenly realized, I don't understand this topic nearly as well as I thought I did? It could be something in school, or it could be something else in your everyday life, cooking. Like, I think this is a common experience. And one of the best ways to learn something yourself is to practice putting those ideas into your own words. So that's one reason, is it's a way of testing that you have learned the material. But honestly, in this class, that is not as important as the second thing, which is just the act of writing, and learning how to write is something which is incredibly important in your everyday lives. How many of you have applied for a job before? Any job. What sorts of things do they ask for with your job application? What's included in the application? Qualifications is one. You have to say what you've done. There has to be a resume. And how is a resume? Is a resume spoken down? Is it spoken out loud? Do you walk up to someone and say, here's my resume, and then you just recite everything you've done? No, it's written. So here's another reason for it. Also, when you send in an application to somebody, how do you get it to them usually? Might be an online portal, but what's another way in which you ask about jobs or experience? Yeah, you email them. And you know what an email is? A short paper. That is what an email is a very short paper. If you interact with people in the modern world via email, every time you write an email, you are in essence writing a very short paper. So the other reason that paper writing is useful is because paper writing is a disguised, like a fancier disguised classroom setting of practicing a skill, which is going to be important to you for your entire life. Many of the jobs you're going to be writing in the course of your life will require a cover letter, where basically you have to write up why is it that you are a good candidate for this job? And you have to explain why they should hire you, and you need to write it in a way that stands out. Also, most people these days in a position of hiring or anything else get hundreds of emails a day. You need to make sure that your emails stand out. And the only way to do that is to write your email well, clearly, and a way that is helpful. So not only does writing a paper help you illustrate that you've learned the things from this class, it's also just a skill that is worth learning. Because the fact is, with email, I mean, it's been this way for the past 100 years, but even more so with email, so much of your life will be conducted written, and so much of your life will be associated with reading and writing and what other people will be writing to you. Another thing is, if you're in a position in which you need to judge things that are being written to you, if you don't know what good writing looks like, if you can't do it, it will be harder for you to assess other people's writing. So at the end of the day, the reason why professors want you to write papers is because writing is a skill that is very useful to have. And now, here's another thing about writing and why it's worth teaching. How many of you remember learning your first language? So if you spoke Spanish first, you remember learning Spanish. If you spoke English first, you remember learning English. Anyone remember this? Yeah, no. The reason none of you can remember it is because just about every human being naturally learns to speak between the age of 1 and 2, and it just kind of happens. How many of you, though, have memories of learning to read or learning to write? Usually it would have been in kindergarten or in first grade or something like that. Yeah, the reason why is because reading and writing is not something that comes naturally to human beings. If you just drop a baby in a room of talking adults for a year, the baby will gradually learn to speak. But exposing a child to writing, they will not learn to write. It's a skill that you need to learn, both generally speaking in terms of even what the letters are, but then also it's something that takes practice, learning to do it well. It is a skill that you can become better at. And the best way to become better at any skill is practicing it. So that's why I want you all writing papers. It is a skill that is very useful in your general lives. And it is also a way to help you learn some of the core concepts of this class by putting it into your own words, because putting things into your own words helps you learn them better than studying for a test ever can. So does all of that make sense? I'm just like, we're not just asking you these things to torture you, or at least I'm not. I actually want you to get something out of it. And I think this is a skill that is something that will benefit you in the long term. So does that all make sense so far? Awesome. All right. So then, writing, like all skills, is something you can do better or worse. You can be a good writer, you can be a bad writer in a specific area. But also, like so many other skills, writing comes in different forms. So for instance, you can have somebody who's good at sports generally, they're just kind of athletic, but they're still going to be better at some sports than others. You can be the best player ever and have no idea how to throw a baseball. In the same way, we talk about writing as if it's one giant thing, but really there are many types of writing. And like all sports, whether you're good at a certain type of writing has some carryover with other types of writing. but not a guarantee. So you can have somebody who's very good at writing one way and very bad at writing another. And so in this class, we're going to be looking at one particular type of writing. And that type of writing, some of the things we're talking about and learning about will apply to all writing in any class you ever have. But we're also going to be focusing on a specific type of writing, which is going to be a very useful one, generally speaking. But before we get into that type of writing, what are some types of writing that are out there? Or another way of putting this, what are some types of papers or types of things a person could read? Types of writing. So what just are some different styles or types of writing? And this is an open-ended, there's not going to be wrong questions here. There's infinitely many answers. Argumentative is one. So what is an argumentative style of writing? What is the point of argumentative writing? What are you trying to do? Anyone know? And we'll come back to this one in a second, if nobody knows the answer. Because this is the one we're going to be talking about today, is argumentative writing. All right, we'll come back to that. So argue a point or idea. So that's the idea with an argumentative writing. It is, and we'll come into a lot more detail because this is what we'll be talking about, but it's basically defending a certain point or trying to convince someone that something is true. What are some other types of writing? Ones that you have maybe been asked to do in other classes, but not in this class. What are some other styles of writing, types of writing you can come across? So MLA and APA, those are actually types of formatting. Those are types of ways in which you do citation. So this is more of a more general question, Rogelio. Narrative. So what do we mean by narrative? Or I'm just going to put up storytelling. Storytelling. So argumentative and persuasive are related. So we're going to put those two up together. Persuasive. Storytelling. What is storytelling? What is the point of storytelling? It's kind of in the name. To tell a story, yeah. So when you're, and what type of writing you're doing determines what makes of the writing you're doing good or bad. So for instance, if you're telling a story, what makes the story writing good, or what makes it a good story? What if you have to write a story for a paper? Say you've got a teacher who tells you to write a fairy tale. What makes it a good story? Details, yes, but what sorts of details? What is it that determines what details are the good ones? So just think, if you're reading a story, like a fiction story, what makes it good? And I don't mean like, I just mean generally speaking, like what, when you finish it, what can you look back and say? And I'm asking this in the broadest sense. Why, if you start reading a story and you keep reading it, why do you keep reading it? You're hooked. It's enjoyable. Storytelling, the key with good storytelling is it has to be enjoyable or fun. That is what makes storytelling writing good. So it doesn't matter how much detail it has if that detail doesn't make it enjoyable. It's about enjoyable details, fun details. So with storytelling or story writing, the goal is to be enjoyable. All right, what other types of writing are there? Let me think. When you're walking, let me think, what's the best way of doing this? So informative writing is another one. Informative. Another way of putting this is like news or things like that. So for informative writing, all you're trying to do is give information or tell someone about something. So what makes informative writing good? What makes a newspaper article a good newspaper article? So the headline is part of it. And what does a good headline do? What is the point of a good headline? So it grabs the reader's attention. So another part is enjoyable or hooking. So attracts people. So part of it is good writing draws people in, good informative writing, but that's not the only thing. So for instance, here's a headline I could write. And I try to get this published in a newspaper. If I write an article called Pig Flies to Mars and Back, would I ever get this article published in the New York Times? And I'm asking this in like the simplest way. No, why not, Justin? I would not. It's unrealistic. And not only that, simply put, it isn't true. Informative writing has to be true. The point of informative writing of a newspaper article is to give information. So you have to make sure that it's true. So for instance, it doesn't have to be, I mean, I'm sure some of you are sports fans. When somebody presents a story about so-and-so gets traded from one team to the other, it is usually not the most enjoyable reading. The writing style is not beautiful. It's not exciting. It's not a page turner. But it's providing you with true information. Okay, here's another one. How many of you listen to music? What type of music do you like to listen to? It can be artists, it can be style, hip hop. Hip hop is a very good one. Hip hop / rap. In rap, what is one of the main instruments, or one of the main, it's not really an instrument, what is the main thing that is in, well, basically you've got a hip hop song. Yeah, the beats is part of it, the beat and flow, but then what's the other half? You can have purely instrumental hip hop, but a lot of instrumental hip hop, or a lot of hip hop also has what? The words, the lyrics. Lyrics is a style of writing. What makes lyrics good? Do they have to be true? No, they don't have to be true necessarily. Sometimes they can be, but they don't have to be. Do they have to tell a story? No, not necessarily. Some hip hop does, some doesn't. Do they have to convince you of something? Do they have to prove a certain point? No, they don't have to. Sometimes they do. So what is it that makes good lyrics in a hip hop song? Or good lyrics in any song with vocals? The flow. So it's the way in which it's presented a lot of time. They sound good. The words flow together nicely. Another thing is they make you feel a certain way, and so hip hop is really just like the most popular form of modern poetry. And it's poetry to a beat. And it's just like other poetry, the goal of good hip hop is for the sounds of the words to be good, to be read or presented in a way that is interesting, and to make you feel a certain way. So that's what makes good lyrics. So what you can see is each style of writing, what makes it, and there's many more styles. Recipes is again going to be like, the key part with a recipe is that it's clear and unambiguous and you know exactly what you're asking about. So for any type of writing, what style of writing you're being asked to do determines what your end goal should be. If you're being asked to write hip hop lyrics, your goal should be for them to sound good together and to make an audience feel a certain way. If your goal is to tell a story, then your goal should be to make it enjoyable and interesting and hook the reader. If your goal is to be informative, you want to make sure that it's clear what it is you're talking about and that it's true. And if you're writing argumentatively, which is what we're going to be talking about, the goal is to convince the reader, to persuade them that a certain thing is true. So does all of this make sense? Of just like, there's no such thing as good writing. What counts as good writing entirely depends on what type of writing you're being asked to do. If you provide a good story to a newspaper article, if it's not true, they won't care. If you present a hip hop lyrics in an argumentative class, they might be great hip hop lyrics, but they're not going to get you an A on a persuasive paper. Does all of this make sense? And I think it's something where once you pause and think about it, it's kind of common sense. But because teachers don't take the time to actually pause and break this all down, you can see paper and then just, I genuinely think there are few things scarier in the modern world than a blank Word or Google Doc staring at you. And you just know, I have to make a paper appear on this thing. And because of that, we often don't take the time to think, well, what am I being asked to do? So given this, you are now assigned a paper for any class. What is the first question you should ask yourself after you've read over the prompts? So given what we've just said about types of writing and everything else, what's the first question you should ask yourself? What is the topic? But even more than what the topic is, speaking even more generally, before you even ask what the topic is, because you could have like New York City. So yeah, exactly, Kevin. It's what type of paper you're being asked to write. So is my teacher asking me to write a story? Is my teacher asking me to write lyrics or a poem? Are they asking me to tell like a newspaper story? Or are they asking me to argue something? Or what exactly are they asking me? So whenever you're given a paper prompt, ask yourself, what am I being asked to do here? What type of writing have I been asked to do? Now for this class, what's the answer? What type of writing are you being asked for? Kind of gave away the answer already. Argumentative, yeah. So argumentative paper. So the first thing you have to do is ask yourself, what type of paper am I writing? And once you find out that you're writing an argumentative paper, then you need to ask yourself, well, what makes a good argumentative paper? And so a lot of what we talk about today, some of it will apply to other styles of writing, but really we're going to be now focusing not, once you've figured out you're writing a paper, and it can be for any class, they ask you to write an argumentative paper. It can even be things outside of a classroom setting. A certain sense, a job application is a type of argumentative writing. A cover letter especially is a type of argumentative writing. So this is going to apply more generally than just for this class. But we are going to be focusing just on argumentative writing. So now the question is, what is argumentative writing? And we kind of said the point of argumentative writing is to prove a point. And not just to prove a point. It's to give a reasoned defense of some claim. So what do each of these words mean? Reasoned defense of a claim. First off, what is a claim? What is it to claim something? If I claim that the sky is blue, what am I doing? Or I claim that we never went to the moon. What am I claiming? What is it to claim this? So I'm stating it. And I'm not just stating it, I'm saying that it's true. So a claim is something that you're saying is true. So you can so that's the first thing. You're giving a point and you're stating it. What is it to defend something? And I can mean this, in a sports setting, in a war setting. What is it to defend something? And I mean this in the most broad way possible. You protect it. And specifically, you are protecting it from potential attack. So in a military setting, it's literally stopping the enemy from taking something of yours. In a sports setting, it's preventing the other team from scoring. In a paper, it's preventing someone who disagrees with you that you're wrong. So that's what we mean by defense here. And then what is a reason? What is it to give a reason or to present a reason? And this is kind of a tough concept to wrap your head around, but it's easier. Maybe let's go with an example. What do you want for dinner tonight? And I'm asking this quite literally. What do you want for dinner tonight? Rice. What is one reason you want rice for dinner, Justin? Or it's good. That is a reason. So when you are saying a reason for something, what you're doing is giving evidence that you should do it or that it should be true. Another one would be, How many of you believe that the sun is going to rise tomorrow? The claim would be the sun's going to rise tomorrow. What reason do you have to think the sun's going to rise tomorrow? It's been rising every day for the last, millions of years, probably, actually. Maybe even billions. I don't know. But yeah, it's done it every day. So what a reason is you're just saying one true thing. No, Joel is correct. You can't be 100% sure, because what could happen to the sun tonight? We can't be 100% sure that the sun's going to rise tomorrow. Because why? It could explode, exactly. It could disappear. The earth could explode, and then there's nothing for it to rise up from. So you can't be 100% sure. But generally speaking, the fact that it's risen so many times, World War III, because it's risen so many times, this gives you a reason to believe the claim that it's going to rise tomorrow. So what an argumentative paper is you are providing true statements that together serve to prove a claim by defending that claim against anybody who might want to disagree with you. So does that make sense of what an argumentative paper is? So this means you could have an argumentative paper on just about any topic imaginable. You could have an argumentative paper about why New York is the greatest city in the world. Or you could have an argumentative paper about why Hamilton is the greatest musical ever written. Or you could have an argumentative paper about why Biggie is the greatest hip hop artist of all time. All of these are the sorts of claims that you could give a reasoned defense for. So when you to write a paper that is an argumentative paper, what I'm asking you to do is provide that sort of thing about a particular topic that is related to something for this class. So what I'm ultimately asking you to do is identify some claim that you believe is true, and then provide reasons that will defend that claim against potential opposition and would convince somebody else that your claim is something they should believe. Does this make sense to everyone? So it's not just about writing down your own thoughts, it's about saying what the reasons are that the thing you're arguing for is true, or not only is true, is something you think is true and think other people should think is true as well. Does all of this make sense to everyone? Let me take a sip of water while you digest a little bit. So, with that in mind, let's actually, okay. So once you've recognized something's an argumentative paper, and what argumentative writing is trying to do is prove a point or give a reasoned defense of some claim, you've now recognized that in the grand scheme of things, this is what you're going to be asked to do. So I'm going to write down the steps in the writing process from the things that we've already touched on. So step one, what type of writing? So you first ask yourself, what type of writing am I being asked? Step two, what does that type of writing entail? Or what is that type of writing? What do you have to do? So in this case, for this class, it's argumentative first, and then the next thing is reasoned defense of some claim. Now, we now know, generally speaking, what's the next step in the writing process? What do you have to do now? And this is something somebody said before. What do you have to now ask yourself? The next goal, you're working your way towards writing your paper. You've identified that you've been asked to do argumentative writing, and you've reminded yourself argumentative writing is a reasoned defense of some claim. What is the next thing you have to do? Yeah, pick a topic. You have to pick a topic. And what does that entail? Well, we've said that the goal of writing is to come up with a reasoned defense of some claim. So what is your topic going to be? Or what is the centerpiece of your paper going to be if the overall goal of the paper is to present a reasoned defense of some claim? What will the topic be, or what are you going to be focused on? Give you a clue, it's in this. If you're trying to argue that Biggie is the greatest rapper of all time, what is the topic of your discussion? What is the thing you're for? Biggie. Biggie's your topic. And it's not just Biggie. It's literally the statement, Biggie is the best. Or another one, if you write an argumentative paper on the topic, so the thing you have to ask yourself with the topic is basically 2 steps. One, what, or I'm going to put this with letters. What question is at issue? B, what answer is right? So in the case of Biggie is the greatest rapper of all time, what is the question that people are, if I say Biggie is the greatest rapper of all time, what is the question that I'm trying to answer? Or what is the thing that is at issue here? Using a WH word, what is really at issue? If he's the greatest of all time, or a more general one, who is the greatest rapper of all time? That is the question. So what is at issue? Who's the greatest rapper of all time? And then what is my answer to that question? Biggie. So this right here is going to be the claim that the entire rest of your paper is trying to argue for. And any good argumentative piece of writing is going to be a defense of this one claim. So the next thing you have to ask yourself is, what is the general topic, or what is the question that's being asked? And then you have to ask yourself, what answer is correct? Or more specifically, you can ask yourself, what possible answers are there? And then see what is right. So I have provided you with 3 paper prompts. All of them are argumentative writing. Therefore, all of them are going to be reasons defense of some claim. And I just made you spend 20 minutes reading over these prompts. So what I want to do now is ask you, for each of the prompts, what is the question that's being asked? And then what are the possible answers to that question? So I'm not going to give you the answers right now. I want you all to tell me. So the first prompt is the one about the COVID app. What is the question that's at issue? What is the thing that you're being asked to form a claim on, or form an opinion about and argue for? One side of. What is the issue that is being asked at this point? Whether the app should be published or not. Exactly. For topic 1, the question at issue is yes app, no app. So should it be possible? So, or I guess, yeah, should app is the topic. Should app be allowed? What are the possible answers you could give to this question? Another way of putting that is, what is the possible claims you could raise, or things you could argue for on this topic? If somebody asks you, should it be allowed, what are the possible answers? Yes or no? Simply put, there's basically 2 answers. Yes, no, and then you could also say maybe, if. So really, it's a yes, it should be allowed, no, it shouldn't be allowed, or yes, it should be allowed if you do X, Y, and Z, or no, it shouldn't be allowed unless these things are done. So there's also a maybe answer in there, but that's what the general claim is on this topic. So whenever you're, for this class, this prompt, the claim you would be arguing for is either going to be, yes, this app should be allowed, or no, this app should not be allowed, or maybe, provided these other things. And we'll talk a little more in detail about what the maybe looks like. But by the end of this reading of this prompt, you should be able to go, all right, what's being asked is, should this app be allowed? And the possible answers are yes or no. All right, second question. This is the vaccine one. Imagine what happened. Imagine that the vaccine went horribly wrong and a bunch of people died. That's the prompt. What is the question that's being asked? What is an issue for this paper prompt? Who should be held responsible? Who should be held responsible? So what are the possible answers here? What are the possible claims you could give? And this is a longer list because it's not just a yes or no question. The pharmaceutical company. Who else? Government. Who else? The news, or the people who spread the information that was good and pushed people to work too fast. Who else? The software engineers, yeah, the coders. All of these are your possible answers. And it's not only that this is the possible answers, you could combine them. You could say something like the government is partly at fault, but the company is even more at fault. Or you could say something like the government and the company are at fault and the coders definitely are not. Or you could say the coders are at fault. All of these are claims you could argue for in response to this prompt. So this is the second one. The question is who should be held responsible, and the claim you're arguing for would be something like the pharmaceutical company is responsible, or the news and the government are responsible. All of that is the type of claim you'd be arguing for. All right, the third prompt is the one in which North Korea hacks, you're the president, North Korea hacks Google and Facebook and steals large amounts of information. That's the prompt. What is at issue? What is the main question that is being asked? What was stolen? So that's part of it, but that's more background. It's not really, because what was stolen is a bit more of a descriptive thing. So yeah, so Tal's right that what was stolen is going to be an important part of the paper, but what's really at issue is what actions you should take as the US government in response. So what response? So what are the possible answers to this? What response or what action should be taken? Well, what are the possible actions or responses? Another way of putting that is, what is the claim you could be arguing for if this is the prompt you choose? So privacy is part of it. So privacy is, again, a topic that's tied into it. But what is the action you'd be taking would be something like what? Well, it would be something like increase privacy of Google's consumers, or put new regulations to protect privacy on Google and Facebook. So that would be the sort of thing. So like institute new laws. That would be one sort of response, is institute new privacy laws. What are some other responses that are possible here? Invade, that's another one. War, that would be a possible response. Add internet laws. Laws in US around internet. What are some others? I'm going to put up one that you could have, which is do nothing. All of these are the potential answers to the question, what should I do as the president in this imaginary scenario? So what I've just illustrated here is basically the potential core answers to each of these paper prompts. What an argumentative paper is asking you to do is pick one of the answers to these questions and then build an entire paper explaining the reasons that that answer is correct. So once you've identified that you're writing a reasoned defense of some claim and you've identified the topic, you now have to ask yourself, what do I think is the right answer? Do I think that war is the right answer here? Do I think that doing nothing is the right answer here? Do I think that the right answer to the COVID tracker app is yes, it should be allowed exactly as it is? Do I think no, it shouldn't be allowed? That is what you have to ask yourself at this point, and that is the core of the paper writing process. This right here, once you figure out the topic and what you've figured out the single claim you want to be arguing for, what is another word which you've heard teachers throw around to describe that one sentence which summarizes the main point you're arguing for? Anyone know? It is a sentence. Thesis. Yes. Thesis. So all the thesis of a paper is, of an argumentative paper, is the claim that the rest of the paper is arguing for. And so in this class, for each of these papers, you can, before you even start writing it, you can know what the potential theses are for that paper. So for the first one, what are your potential theses about the COVID tracker app? Well, we said the question was, should this app be allowed? And the possible claims you can make are yes or no. So your possible theses for your paper are yes, the COVID tracker app should be allowed, and no, the COVID tracker app should not be allowed, and yes, it should be allowed if you do these other things, or no, it shouldn't be allowed until you do these other things. Those are the possible theses. So just to review, what are the possible theses for the second one? The who's responsible if the app or if the vaccine went poorly. What are the possible theses you could have? And again, this is just basically asking you to repeat what's come before. What are your potential theses for the who's responsible? The government should be responsible. The pharmacy, exactly, Justin. The thesis to this paper would be something like, the government should be held responsible and forced to pay a large fine for the COVID or for the COVID vaccine's failure. That would be a thesis. For the third one, what would be a possible thesis you could argue for if Google gets hacked and by the North Korean government? Again, this is just asking you to say again what we just talked about. So the thesis, though, would be what? It would be, it's not about remember, the prompt is, you're the US president, and the question is, what should I do at this point? So what would the possible answer to the question, what should I do at this point, be? So what action? Declaring war, because they've done too many things already. That is a very possible thesis. What are some other ones? And I want you, instead of just saying generally speaking, I want you, like Joel just did, to say what the possible answers are, the possible things you could argue. So one thing you could say is, I should declare war. What's another thing you could say as the US president? Cyber response. Yeah, we could hack into their cyber networks, do nothing. These are the possible theses for this paper. So whenever you're writing a paper, you have to identify what the topic is, the question, and then choose what you are going to argue for. And once you've done that, the core of your paper is done. You have now identified the single claim that the rest of this 3 to 5 page paper is going to be about. In an argumentative paper, there is a single thing you're going to be trying to prove in the entirety of your paper. So to go with some other argumentative papers, how many of you have written to a professor asking them for an overtally into a class? All right, when you write this email, what are you trying to do? What is the thesis you're trying to get across? A better question is, what's at issue when you send this email? So an overtally is, the class is full, you want to get in. So what's the topic? What is the thing that you're trying to convince the professor to answer? And what answer are you trying to get them to give? Because this email is a type of miniature argumentative paper. Yet you're requesting, so the topic at issue is, can I get in? And you're trying to give the thesis, yes, you should let me in. A job application is another type of argumentative paper of a sort. What is the thesis of a job application? What is the topic? Well, first off, what is the topic that's being asked by somebody who you've given this job application to? What question are they asking in their firm? When does a company ask for a job application? So this is more, yeah, when they're hiring. So very generally speaking, they're asking the question, who should we hire? And what is the thesis of your job application? What is your thesis? What is your answer to the question, who should this company hire? You should hire me. Exactly. That is the thesis of any job application, is you should hire me. I'm the person you should hire. Or if you write your professor an email asking them to change your grade, the thesis is, what should my grade be? And the answer is whatever you say. All of these are cases in which you are providing a sort of argumentative writing, and the thesis is the main thing you're trying to get across. And you can see then why this skill of writing argumentatively is useful, because you're going to have many opportunities in your life in which you are trying to convince someone of something. Another case would be if you try to convince, if you were a kid and you tried to convince your mom to buy you an Xbox for Christmas, then when you said, Mom, you should buy me an Xbox because all my friends have it, that is a miniature spoken sort of argumentative speech. You are giving a thesis, buy me an Xbox. That is the claim you're arguing for. So does all of this make sense to everyone? Just generally speaking, this is the core of your paper. You've been given a question, and what I'm asking you to do is pick one of the possible answers and write an entire paper explaining why that's the right answer. Rebecca, is that a yes or is that a question? Okay. So no questions, anybody? We're good on this. All right. So this part of the paper is all before you actually start the writing process. Now, what comes next? You now know what topic you're writing on, and you know what answer you want to give to it. Well, what comes next? How do you go about turning, because right now all you've got is a single sentence. How do you go about turning that sentence into an entire paper? Well, in an argumentative paper, you are arguing for your thesis with reasons. Remember, it's a reasoned defense of some claim. There are other ways of getting someone to believe a claim that don't involve giving them reasons. Can anyone guess, if I want you to believe something, or I want you to say something out loud, what could I, as your professor, do that didn't involve giving you reasons to believe it, that would still get you to say this? It wouldn't be very ethical of me, but I could do it. I could order you to do it. That would be one. What is closely related to order? So ordering is one. I could just say like, so-and-so believes this thing, or so-and-so, I want you to curse at your classmate. That would be one thing. What else could I do though, related to orders? I could threaten you. I could bribe you. These are all ways to get you to accept some claim, but they're not reasoned ways. So what is it to give a reasoned defense? Well, rather than threatening bodily harm or something like that, I give you other true things that provide evidence that the thing I'm arguing for is true. So for instance, here's a claim I want to argue for. New York City is greater than all other cities. So the question at issue is, what's the greatest city in the world? And my thesis is New York is the greatest city. What are some reasons a person could give that New York is the greatest city in the world? And you might not agree with this. You might think another city is the best. But so looks nice. Pretty architecture. That's one thing. What else could you say about New York being the best city in the world? What else? Transportation. Good transit. What are some other things? Another way of putting this is, why should I believe that New York is the best city in the world? Or if you think a different city is the best city, why do you think that city is the best? It's got attractions, things to do. I'm just going to put lots to do. What else? So yeah, transportation, diversity. It's a very diverse place, which is good because you get to meet tons of energy. So it's just like a living, lively place. You're never bored. There's always something to do. These are all what I mean by reasons. These are all things that you think are true. And not only do you think they're true, they provide reason or evidence for thinking the grander claim is true. So your thesis is New York is the greatest city in the world. And then the reasons you give are what reasons you have for thinking that that is the best, that this general claim that New York is the greatest city in the world. These are the other true things that you give to provide evidence for this. So the next question to ask yourself is basically, once you've figured out what your thesis is for this paper. So if you come to the conclusion the COVID tracker app is bad, you come to the conclusion the COVID tracker app is bad, you now have to ask yourself why. Why is that the case? And your answers to the question of why is it true that the COVID tracker app is bad are your reasons for thinking it's true. And those are going to be the paragraphs you give in your paper to support your thesis. So basically, the way the writing process goes is once you've figured out your thesis, you then ask yourself, why should I believe that's true? And more importantly, why should somebody else believe that's true? So this right here is a process in which you are, and this is another reason why writing is so difficult. What this is time traveling mind control. What writing is, in a certain sense, is a type of time traveling mind control. And I mean this quite literally, of when you write something down, what you are trying to do is cause somebody else in the future reading that to have a certain thought that you want them to have. So in a certain sense, you're trying to get a future reader to believe, to have the very thought you want them to have. So if your thesis is New York is the greatest city in the world, you are then trying to write a paper that will travel into the future and control their mind into agreeing with you. If your thesis is the COVID tracker app shouldn't be allowed, you are trying to write a paper that will travel into the future, come to my head, and convince me that you're correct, it shouldn't be allowed. So what you have to ask yourself at this point, when you're coming up with the reasons for your paper, is ask yourself, what are some of the true things that would convince somebody else that my thesis is correct? So if your thesis is the computer programmers are fully responsible for the failed COVID vaccine, then you have to ask yourself, why do I think the programmers are responsible? And not only that, what would I have to say that would convince somebody else that the programmers are responsible? So does this make sense to everyone? Once you've picked your thesis, the next step is to ask yourself, what reasons would I have to give someone to believe my thesis? Does that make sense? And by this point, we have not written anything down on your Word document. This is all in your head. all in like a little outline form, all on a scratch piece of paper. Much of the writing process happens before you ever sit down in front of your blank laptop. So does this all make sense to everyone? What these steps are and how they're all part of the writing process? I want to make sure everyone's on board here. Are there any questions, comments, concerns so far on this general sort of task of what your goal is in this paper? Any questions, comments, concerns, feelings? Are we all doing okay? All right. I'm going to then, all right, once you've come up with, and literally, in a paper like this, the way I would go about writing it is I would first read all the prompts. Then for each prompt, I would write in the margin what I would highlight the questions being asked or circle them or underline them. It can be, if I printed it out, I would do that physically. If I just have the PDF in front of me, I just highlight it. Then for each of those questions, I would write down the possible theses in the margin or in a little bubble. So on the PDF, like in Adobe Acrobat or on a separate Word document, I would put that down. And then once I did that, I would read the questions and theses again to see which of those topics seems most interesting to me. I would sit there and I'd go, I don't really care about privacy. I'm not going to write topic 1. I do care about international relations. So I think I might write on topic 3. And then you decide for sure, yes, I'm going to write on topic 3. And then I'm going to ask myself, well, what are the possible answers to this topic? The possible answers are invade, do nothing, etc. And then I ask myself, which of these answers seems right and why? And I would sit there and ask myself for about 5 minutes, like, what do I think the good answers are and why? And I just brainstorm there. And this can take you 15 minutes. And once you've got a few ideas rattling around, this is where you want to start actually getting into the make a plan / structure / skeleton. This is the point at which your thinking process turns into the get some stuff down on paper. Because the nice thing about an argumentative paper is you want the structure of your paper to mirror the structure of your argument or the structure of the way you're trying to convince somebody to believe something. So one way in which this helps is once you know what argument you're giving and what some of the reasons for that are, you can now just build a paper that very neatly, you can just make the structure of your paper map up with your reasons and everything else. So does everyone have what's written down here before I erase this and show a little bit more what I'm talking about? Does anyone need me to leave up these 6? I'm just running out of room here. All right, nobody says they want it, so I'm erasing it. We're now not going to talk about the steps of the writing. We're now going to talk about, once you've figured out and done all these steps, how do we turn this into an actual paper? And basically, the way to think about it is you just turn your thesis and your background into one paragraph, and then your reasons each become their own paragraphs. So you can do it more fluidly, but you might ask yourself, how do I structure this paper? How do I turn this idea into a paper? Quite straightforwardly. You start off with your thesis. And your thesis, as the single most important part of your paragraph, or of your paper, becomes the core of paragraph 1. Then, your reasons. So if our thesis was New York City is the greatest city in the world, then our first paragraph is going to be state New NYC is greater than all. Then what's our first reason? Let's go with transportation. Body paragraph 1. would be all about transportation and why that shows that New York is the greatest city in the world. Reason 2, we said, was diversity. That would be body paragraph 2. Your reason 3 was so much to do. That would just be body paragraph 3. You now have a 4-paragraph paper, and you know that your paper is going to have to be 4 paragraphs. And in the first paragraph, you're stating your thesis and what's at issue. And then your first body paragraph would be all about the New York City transportation system and why that transportation system provides a reason for thinking New York is the best. Another body paragraph would be about New York's diversity and why the fact New York is diverse gives you a reason to believe that New York is the greatest city in the world. And then the third body paragraph would cover the reason that New York has so much to do and why that gives you a reason to think that the city is the best in the world. Does this make sense to everyone? How once you've figured out what topic you're talking about and what your reasons are for it, you've basically gotten the core of the structure of your paper. And so when now you sit down in front of your blank Word document, you don't have to ask yourself, what the hell am I supposed to be doing here? Because you now have a structure. You know that you're going to be writing a 4-paragraph paper. And you know the first paragraph is going to be stating the issue. The second paragraph is going to be about transportation. The third paragraph is going to be about diversity. And the fourth is going to be about how much there is to do in New York City. So does everyone see how approaching a paper from the goal of what is the topic at issue? What am I going to be arguing about it? Can turn very quickly into here's going to be the general structure of my paper. Does this all make sense to everyone? This is another way of putting this is you now have a skeleton to your paper. Any questions on this point about how I got from simply reading the prompt into I now have a general idea about how I want this paper to go? Okay. If there are no questions, this is basically, if you do all of this stuff well, this structure stuff in the first 20 minutes, you are setting yourself up for success. What I will say is, if you were to do all of this stuff well, it doesn't matter how poor of a writer you are. It doesn't matter any of that stuff. You have set yourself up. Basically, if you could structure your paper in this way, you are in the B range already. If you do this stuff well, if you have your ideas organized and the things set up, you are basically well on your way to, even if you write it all in the worst way possible, you are on your way to a B paper, at the very least. So the question now is, how do you turn this idea of the general structure into a paper? How do you turn this sort of general idea into something that is going to have this written at the top of it? What goes into that? Well, this is where we go back to what the goal of an argumentative paper is and where the time travel element comes in. What makes a paper a successful argumentative paper is it convinces me, the reader, to believe that what your conclusion is true. And you do it by presenting me with those reasons. So it's about presenting the reasons for your thesis and explaining why those reasons prove exactly what you say they do. So in the case of New York being the greatest city in the world, you explain to me that New York is diverse, and you explain to me that the fact New York is diverse is a good reason to believe that it's the greatest city in the world. So once you figured out what your body paragraphs are going to be, like what the focus of them is, and you can really think of each body paragraph as a miniature paper, because the goal of each miniature paper is to prove this right here is a reason to believe my thesis. So your paragraph on diversity is basically a miniature paper that says the fact that New York is so diverse gives you a reason to think it's the greatest city in the world. That is a miniature thesis right there, and that will be the topic. So what you have to do to turn those body paragraphs into success is NYC equals diverse. The goal of this body paragraph is to explain to a lazy, stupid, mean reader why New York City's diversity shows it's the best. So the goal of the body paragraph is now to explain in a single, cohesive, clear sequence of sentences why the thing you have said is a reason really is a reason. So this would be something along the lines of, another reason to think New York is the best is that it is the most diverse city in America. This is shown by the fact that blah, blah, and you just list off some statistics. Then you'd say, the fact that New York is so diverse is important because it allows people to learn and learn about places they've never been and have experiences they couldn't have in a more undiverse place. For instance, so do you see in this case, what you're trying to do in a body paragraph is turn this general reason to believe your thesis into a much more fleshed out, specific explanation for why the thing you're saying proves that your thesis is true. Does that make sense? I'm speaking kind of generally here, but I just want to make sure that everyone is on board with what the point of a body paragraph is. And then what I'm going to do here is put up like an actual paper structure of how a successful paper will look. Is all this, are we okay with all this? I feel like I'm losing some. I know this class is a little lectury, but it's very important. And I just think if you're able to stick through this and follow along, it will greatly help you in the actual paper writing process. So basically, given what the goal of a body paragraph is, and given what the thesis is and all, generally speaking, I think a paper for this class and any sort of general arguing for one particular claim sort of paper, I think can have a structure like this. You've got paragraph 1 equals introductory paragraph. So what do you want to go into the introductory paragraph? You now know the topic you're writing on is that the COVID tracker app, and you want to make sure to argue that the COVID tracker app is bad. So what all is going in the first paragraph of the paper if your overall goal is to convince your reader to agree with your conclusion that it's bad? What is the first step in trying to get someone to believe this? What is going to go in this initial paragraph? And I'm opening this up. Just think about it. You're trying to convince someone the COVID tracker app is bad. Or you're trying to convince your mom. You decide for some reason to write your mom a letter, and you're convincing her to try to buy you an Xbox. So first thing, summarize the situation. If you're approaching your mom and trying to get her to buy you an Xbox for Christmas, and you just walk up to her and say, an Xbox, and that's all you say, what is she going to say to you in response? You're just out of the blue. One, she might say no, but before that, if you were to just walk up to your mother and you haven't spoken to her all day, the first words that come, last night you weren't talking about Christmas or Hanukkah or any other sort of holiday, you just walk in and you just say Xbox. What is she going to say to you? Like out of the blue. Imagine if I walked into your house and just said, Chevrolet. Yeah, what? She's going to say, what? What are you talking about? So the first thing you have to do is explain what's at issue. She's going to be looking at you with a weird face. So the first thing you have to do is explain like, hey, mom, I want to talk about what you're going to get me for Christmas. So the first thing you do is say, a summary of what's at issue. In this case, it would be a summary of the case. So basically, the first step would be to explain what the hell the COVID tracker app is and what the question at issue is. Then, once you've explained this stuff, what comes next? Once you've told your mom, I want to talk to you about what I want for Christmas, and she says, okay, what's the next thing you're going to say? Xbox. You're going to state your thesis. You're going to say what it is that you're arguing for. So in the COVID tracker app one, you are going to lay out the case and say, imagine that the US government, blah, blah, blah. And you're going to say, in this paper, I'm going to argue that this app should not be allowed. Or to go with the second prompt, once you've explained the case with the vaccine going wrong, you can say something like, in this paper, I will argue that you should, the US government is responsible for blah, 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 and should be fined. Or the US president should be impeached, or something like that. So these are the first two parts to your introductory paragraph. The third thing, which is not mandatory, but I think is very helpful for a paper like this, this isn't the sort of thing you would necessarily include if you were speaking, but you have a few, so this right here is going to be like just, this part is simple. When you're writing a paper for this class, you're just re-describing the situation I gave you in your own words. So this is anywhere between like 3 and 7 sentences. It's up to you. And this is not a hard number, but that's usually how long it takes. The thesis is 1 sentence. Then the roadmap or game plan is anywhere between like 1 to, I don't know, 4 sentences. And what is a game plan? If game plan, or I guess a recipe would be another way of putting it. What is a game plan? So how many of you have played sports? Or I guess another way of putting it is if you were in a play, these would be basically the would be the best way of putting it. Almost like the stage planning, or game plan is the simplest one though. For those of you who have played sports, how many of you had a coach who before the game gave you a plan of what you were supposed to do in that game? Yeah. So what sorts of things are on this game plan? What are they doing? What is the point of the game plan? Well, it basically just tells you what to expect and what you're going to try to do. So in this paper, the game plan is just going to be a few sentences at the end of the first paragraph that tell your reader what to expect going forward. The basic idea is that before you do something, you tell the audience what you're about to do and why. So for instance, in the New York City one, you've said something like, people from all over the world have argued about what's the greatest city. Some people say London, some people say Beijing, some people say Manila. I personally believe that the best city in the world is New York City. In this paper, I will argue that New York is the best, first by explaining the power of its public transportation, then by explaining why its diversity makes it incredible, and third by explaining how much there is to do and that its energy is unmatched. That is a game plan where you just say, first I'm going to do this, then I'm going to do this, then I'm going to do this to show blah, blah, blah. The reason why you include this is twofold. One, it helps you as your paper writing to keep the paper organized. And two, it helps your reader know what's coming next. So does this make sense of what this idea of a roadmap or game plan is? And something I want to highlight now is I attached this morning 2 sample papers to a prompt other than this one. It was basically a prompt on utilitarianism. I wrote 2 fake papers, one of which is good and demonstrates all these sorts of things, and the other of which is bad and lacks them. So just so you can see as you're writing, like, what does a good paper look like? So if you want to see what a roadmap looks like in action, go and look. It's now under the readings. It's called like 2 sample papers. It includes the fake prompt. It includes the actual answers. So this is the third thing. All right. Body paragraph 1 and 2 and 3. And then, so this is paragraph 1 is that one. Paragraph 2 is background. 3 is your main body paragraph. So the background paragraph is what? Basically, in this class, the background paragraph is not something you're often going to have to include in argumentative papers outside of an academic setting. But in an academic setting, it's very important. So what does it mean to give background on something? And I mean this quite generally speaking. If you're giving someone the background, what are you talking about? Yeah, basically you're giving the context and extra information that they might need to understand what the hell you're talking about. So in this class, if I'm writing a paper on utilitarianism and the topic is utilitarianism good? What sort of background might you have to give to somebody reading your paper to get them to before you can get them to understand whether utilitarianism is good or not? What sort of information would somebody have to have before they could understand your thesis? Your thesis is utilitarianism is good. What sort of background would they need before they could understand your reasoning for why utilitarianism is good? Exactly. Yeah, don't worry about the spelling, Sammy. But yeah, what you have to give are definitions. If you want to explain to someone why LeBron James is the greatest basketball player of all time, and they're from Mars and they've never heard of basketball, you have to explain to them what basketball is before you can explain anything else. In this case, if you want to explain why utilitarianism is good, you have to explain first what utilitarianism is. So before you get into your body paragraph, you said, I'm going to argue that the COVID tracker app is bad because it violates your privacy. Well, what are you going to bring up in this background paragraph? If my thesis is the COVID tracker app is bad, and my reasoning is going to involve that it violates your privacy, exactly, Joel. In the definitions paragraph, you're going to explain what privacy is and why it's important and why you should care about it. If you're talking about the responsibility question, you bring up there's nobody to blame in this case because it's an instance of the many hands problem, what are you going to include in your background definitions paragraph? Again, the question is, if you're writing on topic 2 and your thesis is nobody is responsible for the failed COVID vaccine and nobody should be punished because it's an instance of the many hands problem, what are you going to put in your background definitions paragraph? What is the many hands problem? Another thing you might want to include is who is responsible, or what is responsibility, and how does one judge responsibility? Exactly. The third one about if your third paragraph is, or for the third topic, where did I put it? So yeah, for the South Korea hacking paragraph, you're going to want to describe something like what is meant by hacking. What is it to have a major data breach? Why is this such a problem? Why isn't it just something where we shake our hands and go, oh, well? Those are the sorts of things you're going to want in your background paragraph. So does everyone understand why, before you get into these core body paragraphs, what exactly this background paragraph does? Does that make sense to everybody? and why you'd want to include it. Because again, your goal is to convince your reader that your thesis is right. And if you're going to convince a reader, you need to make sure, and this is why paper writing is difficult, because you have to imagine what would somebody else have to know already before they could understand what my argument is. So that is the nature of the background and the giving of the definitions here. All right, now into the body paragraphs. The main body paragraphs are going to be your reasons for your paper. And I'm going to get into some clarification points in a second about how many, etc. But let's imagine we have 3 reasons. For every given body paragraph, you're going to start off with a signpost. So there are 2 main parts to a body paragraph. And this right here is the real art of a paper, because there's no one thing that counts as a thorough explanation of why this reason supports your thesis. But we'll talk about that in a second. But before you get to that, it is very useful to put in a sentence, which I call a signpost. Now, what does a signpost do? And I mean this in the literal sense of you are walking down the street and you see this. Up on it's in green with white writing. What does this tell you? It's attached to a pole. That is a sign. What does it do? What is the point of that? It tells you where you are. Exactly, Carlos. In a paper, a signpost does exactly the same thing. It tells the reader where you are. So a signpost is a sentence that comes first in a paragraph that tells the reader where they are in your argument. So basically what it is a fancy type. It's not quite just a topic sentence. It's more like this. I'm going to give you an example here, Scott. So imagine it's going to be something like this. The next now that we have a bit more background on NYC, I will now discuss its diversity and why this makes and this helps make it the best city. That's an example of a signpost. So yes, to some extent, it's a topic sentence. In some sense, it's telling you what we're about to talk about now. We're now going to discuss diversity. But what makes something a signpost more so than just a topic sentence is it also explains how this paragraph slots into everything else that's happening in the paper. It tells you what you've just done. We just got more background on New York City. So this would be the signpost for the start of body paragraph 1, the 3rd overall paragraph. We've said we've given background. And now you say, I'm now going to discuss New York's diversity and explain why this diversity helps make New York the best city. So in some sense, yes, it's just a topic sentence, but it's a meaty topic sentence. A simple topic sentence would be something like, the next thing to consider is diversity. That is a topic sentence and it's somewhat of a signpost. But what turns something into a signpost is where you say something like, the next thing to consider is blah, 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 because it will support the thesis, yada, yada way. Does that make sense? And you can see why having a sentence like this really helps the paper flow together nicely. It allows you to transition. So what would be an example of a signpost for paragraph 2? It would be something along the lines of, another reason to believe that New York is the greatest city in the world is it has an excellent public transportation system. And so the third one would be something like, the final reason to think that New York is the greatest city in the world. Or like, a third reason to believe that New York is the greatest city in the world, which is distinct from the other two reasons, is that it's got incredible nightlife and things to do all the time. So do you see there how it is just a topic sentence and also slightly more oomphy than a regular old topic sentence? So a topic sentence is, so like I'd say a signpost is a type of topic sentence, but it's a meaty instance of it. Does that make sense of what these sentences are and why you want to include them? And when you look at the sample, the good sample paper, you'll see I've included a bunch of signposts for each paragraph. We good with that? All right. Everyone on board with signposts? All right. Now, I'm going to erase this because I need a little more space. And this is where the real meat comes in. And this is where paper writing becomes an art, and I cannot tell you how to do it right. This is what the rest of a body paragraph is doing. And what the rest of a body paragraph is doing is explaining why some reason supports your thesis. And there are many, many ways of doing this, and there's no one right way. This is where it comes in. The goal is to say however much you need to convince the reader that explain clearly what your reason is and explain why it supports your thesis. So to go with the New York City one, if you write a paragraph on diversity, and you start off by describing that New York is diverse, what are you going to want to do now? How you have to ask yourself, why is it that New York City being diverse helps make it the best city in the world? So I'm asking you right now, if you were writing a paper on New York being the best, and you want to say one of the reasons it's the best is because it is so diverse, why does that matter? What is the explanation for why that matters and helps make New York the best city in the world? And I'm opening it up right now. What would be an explanation you might give? Well, those of you who like diversity, why do you like it? What is it about New York City's diversity that you like? Would you be fine if every single person you saw looked just like you? If not, why not? So it's easy to find your community. So here are reasons that diversity is good. One is everyone has their own interests, and it's easy to find people with interests and people who you can connect with because there's so many options. If you grow up somewhere where everybody is a certain religion and you don't feel very positively about it, it's very hard to find someone to fit in with. Also, you can try lots of different things and have lots of different activities. So in this body paragraph, what you literally want to say is something like, one reason that New York is the best is because it's diverse. And you say something like, the fact that New York City is so diverse is valuable because it allows for many experiences. For instance, this is what the sort of body paragraph would be. You state what the thing is in the signpost. We're going to talk about the diversity. You then state why, in a little more detail, why it's important, that it allows you to have many different experiences or do many various activities. And then you expand on this to enough degree that even a lazy, stupid, mean reader would know what you're talking about. Another way of thinking about this is you are trying to convince whoever's reading this that you are right, that New York is the best. And one of the ways you're proving that New York is the best is by bringing up its diversity. Now, you want to convince anybody that the diversity of New York helps make it the best. So imagine the person you're writing for is a drunk first grader. Imagine you've got a drunk first grader in front of you, and you are trying to explain to them the fact is that New York's diversity is great. Put it in as much detail as you would need to convince somebody else that you are right. So this involves such things as including examples. It involves providing a quotation and explaining that quotation. It involves saying things as explicit as this is significant because, or this shows that. All of these are the ways in which you turn this general idea that New York is diverse and that's a good thing into proving to someone that New York's diversity is a good thing. So in an actual one of these prompts, if I'm talking about the need to invade North Korea, and my paragraph is something like, the first reason we should invade North Korea is that it will discourage other nations from hacking into our companies. Well, then you explain how it would discourage them and why it's so important to discourage them. And this is why there's no set recipe, because the right way to write a body paragraph is whatever you need to say to convince a reader of what you're saying and why what you're saying is right. Does that make sense to everybody? It's about going into as much detail as you need to explain why this body paragraph supports your thesis. All right, so at this point, I've now said everything about the general structure of a paper and how to go about writing it. Basically, think of writing it in this sense. Step one, figure out what type of writing you have to write. This class, that's easy because you know you have to write an argumentative paper. Step two, read the prompts so you know what the potential issues are. Step three, figure out which prompt you want to write on, which one's interesting to you. Step four, pick what your thesis is on that topic. Are you going to argue that the COVID tracker app should be allowed? Are you going to argue it shouldn't be allowed? Are you going to argue that you should invade North Korea, that you should do nothing, that the government's responsible for the failed vaccine? Step five, why? What are your reasons for it? Step 6 or 7 or whatever number I'm up to, this one, I guess that's 7. Step 7, lay out how you want, write down on a piece of paper how you want your paper to be structured. Include exactly one sentence that you want your thesis to be. Think about how you want to structure the 3, 2, 3, however many body paragraphs, depending on however many reasons you want to give for why the COVID tracker app is good or not. So you should have written down on a little piece of paper, something like this. Paragraph 1 and your thesis written out. Background, you can save for a minute. Then you have body paragraph 1. Body paragraph, which is reason 1. And you write down what that is. And your body paragraph / reason 2. Write down what that is. Then you go, once you've thought about this, you think, what sort of background would I need? And just jot that stuff down. And then once you've got this skeleton, you just fill it in whatever way you think would convince a reader that this body paragraph is a reason to believe the thesis. And this body paragraph is a reason to believe the thesis. So it's basically, instead of just starting at the top and working your way down, think about it as building a skeleton or a foundation and then filling in the gaps. So the last thing I want to say about the actual structure, once you've filled it all in, you can just stick a conclusion on, and all the conclusion has to do is just signal that you've finished. So say something like, I've now explained why the COVID tracker app is a bad idea. It's a bad idea because blah, 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 blah. Does everyone understand that the general structure about paper writing and the general structure that the paper for this class will take? Are we all good? This is all the general stuff. What I want to do now is just talk about some particulars and logistics and things like that. But are there any questions about the general paper writing structure, how to approach it, how to go about it? Any questions at all? Okay. So if nobody has any questions on that stuff, let's just talk actual paper logistics. So the paper is due. The graph. So the graph will not, you mean like a little chart of this stuff? No, it is not on Blackboard, but this video will be on the YouTube and you can just fast forward where however far we are in. But yeah, here's basically, like I will just write up the structure again. Paragraph 1, intro, case, thesis, game plan. Paragraph 2, background. Definitions. Paragraph 3, body. Paragraph 1, signpost. Full explanation. Paragraph 4, body paragraph 2, ditto. Paragraph last, conclusion. That, I'm not going to erase it all. This is basically going to be the overall structure of your paper. For the background paragraph, it's useful to have a signpost as well. And what the signpost for the background paragraph can say is something along the lines of, however, before I can explain my reasons fully, there are some key terms I need to describe. That's all you need for a signpost there. Or like, but before we begin, I want to define privacy or something like that. But generally speaking, it's case, thesis, game plan, all in your first paragraph. Then your signpost and any definitions in your second. Body paragraph, which will be a signpost followed by a full explanation of your reason for thinking that this reason supports the thesis. Then another body paragraph that does something similar, and then you get to the conclusion. So things I want to highlight, as you can tell by this, well, let me just ask this. How many sentences belong in a paragraph? How many sentences should be in a paragraph? You're all right. Keep guessing. Keep guessing. I want more guesses. Come on, people. You're all right and you're all wrong. The correct answer is the correct number of sentences in a paragraph is however many you need. That's the correct answer. It depends, as Justin said. So if you are writing a paragraph and your goal is to prove that New York is the most diverse city and present it in a way that anyone can understand, maybe that's only 3 sentences. Maybe it's 20 sentences. There's not a right answer. You have to ask yourself, what would I need to say to convince somebody else? How many paragraphs have to be in a paper? This, I've given you a somewhat like strict thing, but as you'll notice, there's a big ... here. So how many paragraphs do you need in a paper? Give you a clue, I already have it written on the board. As many as you need, exactly. So generally speaking, for this type of paper, it will be very difficult to do it in less than 4 paragraphs because you want an intro, a background, a body, and a conclusion. But the body can be broken up in however many paragraphs you think you need. If you want to present, I've been treating a single body paragraph as a single reason, but you can spread out your discussion of a single reason in multiple paragraphs. So for instance, if you wanted to describe, say that the COVID tracker app violates privacy, you could divide that into 3 paragraphs. One on the way it allows people to gather data, one on the way it allows hackers to break into your data, and one on the way it allows data mining. Those could be 3 paragraphs all tied into the one reason of it violates your privacy. So the number of paragraphs doesn't really matter. All right. What are some other things I want to highlight here? This word here, you've probably in some class heard, do not use the word I. Ignore that advice for this class. And in most persuasive writing, you should ignore this sort of thing. In a cover letter, you should refer to yourself as I, not yourself in the third person. That'd be weird. So you're allowed to start paragraphs with things like, I will now argue that, or in the next section, I will, or in this paper, I am going to. I is good. Contractions. Good. They're totally fine. In some types of professional writing, they will care about these things. For my class, I don't care about that. I care about structure, and if it's easier for you to write things with contractions, use them. Spelling. I don't care. As long as I know what you're talking about. I care about spelling, and I don't care about punctuation or grammar. Do not put your mental energy into making sure you did that stuff right. As long as your ideas are clear and well structured, and by the end, I know what you're talking about, and I recognize that what you're talking about provides support for your conclusion, then I will not take off points if you spell to like this, or you spell your like this. I mean, you're probably going to want to practice spelling because there are many people out there who really care. But if you are low on brain energy, I would much rather you spend it on the structure and the ideas than on the spelling of it. So those are the first set of general points I want to raise. Citations. Unsurprisingly, if I don't care about spelling and grammar and that sort of stuff, I don't care about what format you do your citations in. You want to do MLA, that's fine. You want to do you want to do Chicago, you want to do footnotes, I don't care. Basically, if you want to use a source from outside this class, and something I want to say about these papers are written so that you do not have to use anything to write them other than the assignments that are assigned for this class. I am not expecting you to go out and find articles. I'm not expecting you to go out and find quotes. It is entirely up to you. If you think you can make a clearer argument by just using class materials, don't include any outside sources. If you think your paper will be better if you include outside sources, feel free to go online and find articles. If you do use things for this class, you don't need to cite them. I don't need a works cited page. I don't need anything. If you take things from outside, all you need to say, so 1 second, Kevin, all you need to say is just include, like down at the bottom, a hyperlink for what it is that you're including. So in these body paragraphs, you need to explain to me in clear terms. The body paragraph is, in a sense, the evidence for your thesis. So if you were to describe that New York City is an incredibly diverse city, if that was your topic, you wouldn't necessarily have to provide a layout of all the details of New York City's diversity. You wouldn't have to say New York is this percent East Asian and this percent white and this percent Latinx and etc. But you would have to provide me with some reason that would convince me that it is true that New York is diverse. So you could say something like those statistics, or you could say, when you walk down a street in New York City, you're often struck by how different the people look from each other in terms of race and ethnicity. For instance, today when I walked down the street, I saw blah, 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 blah. So you have to provide evidence that what you're saying is true. You can't just say something like, I believe New York is very diverse. That's not enough, because remember, the goal is to convince your reader to believe you. That something's your opinion is not enough to convince someone to believe what you're saying. That you think New York has great public transit is not proof that New York has great public transit. If you think that the COVID tracker app violates privacy, it's not enough just to say the COVID tracker app violates privacy. You have to explain why it violates privacy. Give me the reasons to believe you that it violates privacy. If one of the ways you want to do that is by providing statistics that you find online about data, then that can count as evidence. But that's not necessary. You can also give just like a thought process for why this would be a problem. But the goal is, remember, put yourself in the mind of someone else to explain to them why they should fear the fact that the COVID tracker has your information, or why you shouldn't be afraid that the COVID tracker app has their information. So does that answer your question, Kevin, not your Quevin question? All right. So if you include something, just put a hyperlink down at the bottom. Basically, I just want to make sure that if the plagiarism gods come down from on high and say, did this person plagiarize? I can say, no, they found it at this website. Also, if I find something interesting, there's a good chance I'm gonna want to look it up. So just knowing where you got it, what website, that's enough for me. Another thing, quotations. Quotes can be very good and very useful. So if you want to give a definition of the many hands problem from the book, you can include the quotation from the book. But whenever you include a quote, you have to paraphrase in your own terms and explain the significance. So for instance, if you include the definition of the many hands problem, you say, for instance, as the Tavani textbook defines it, the many hands problem is the issue of blah, 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 blah. You then want to, in the next paragraph, say, or the next sentence, immediately afterwards, say something like, to put this in other words and explain exactly what it means. And say, the reason why I bring this up is that yada, yada, yada. So does that make sense? It's good to include quotes, but always, your ability to use Control-C, Control-V is not persuasive and does not convince me, the reader, that you know what you're talking about. If you can use Control-C, Control-V, and then put it into your own words, that is a much more effective way of explaining why your reason proves your thesis, or why this is evidence for your reason. All right, because at this point, my brain is starting to get shot, so I'm sure I'm forgetting to answer some of the most common questions. So I'm going to open it up to you. Do any of you have questions about the paper writing process, about anything I've said today? It can be logistics stuff like double space, spelling, how do you want it turned in, anything like that. It can be substance stuff, whatever you want to ask me about. Oh, there is one thing I want to say about due dates and the like. So, that is one thing that I forgot. All right. Yes, Joel asked, can we include a works cited page if you want to? Absolutely. It is good practice, and you are going to have teachers who care about these things. So if you want to practice, I'm going to confess, I won't be able to recognize if you did it well or not, but if you want to include a works cited page, you absolutely can. The paper is due Thursday. Let me see, where's my calendar? It is due I think it's Thursday the 28th. Thursday the 28th, end of day. End of day means 11:59 p.m. Now, that deadline is the official deadline. If you turn it in a little bit past this without letting me know, like if you turn it in at like 3 in the morning because you're a night owl and you want to get it done, then I'm not going to take off points for it. Honestly, as long as you just get it done. And if something comes up and you need an extension, just reach out and ask me about it. I would much, much rather you write a paper you're happy with than you write a paper that you end up hating. Also, I would much, much rather you ask me at 11:58 for an extension than turn in something plagiarized. If you need an extension, reach out to me ahead of time. And as long as your reasoning isn't something like, Professor, I killed your mom and I need to bury her body, I'm not gonna like not allow you to have an extension. Like just assume if you ask me for an extension, you'll certainly get it. It can be health related, family stuff. Just let me know. So as long as that's the case, just reach out to me ahead of time. If you wait until after the paper's due to ask for an extension, it gets a little tougher for me. So if you think, even if you think something might come up, I will almost certainly give you an extension. Just let me know how long you're going to need. We'll work something out. The other thing, this is a time you'll want to know. 8 a.m. Tuesday, October 26th. Why is 8 a.m. Tuesday, October 26th on the board? Well, I will happily look over drafts of your papers. Basically, if you want me to read over anything you've written, it can be as short as a single sentence, it can be an entire paper. You send it to me, I will take it onto a PDF form and on my iPad do little corrections on the whole damn thing and put little red marks and things that I think are unclear, ways I think you can improve. And I will put in some substantive effort into helping you improve your paper before it's turned in. However, because it takes me a while to do those sorts of things, I need all paper drafts that you want corrected by 8 a.m. on Tuesday the 26th. If you send it to me any later than this, I will not have time to give you feedback on your draft and get it back to you so that you will have time to correct the feedback by the 28th. And I'm happy to read multiple drafts. If you send me a draft on the 20th and I give you feedback on the 22nd, and then on the 23rd, you send me another version of it, I'm happy to give you feedback again. Once the paper is in and done, I do not offer rewrites. It's at the front end, I'm willing to help you as often and as many times as you want. I can have a Zoom meeting with you if you want to set up that and talk about it face-to-face-ish. If you want to give me the physical document and you just want some written comments on it, I can do that. I just need whatever you want to talk about be before the 26th. Once the 26th passes, I can't help you. I can give you an extension, but I can't give you feedback on it. And then once the due date is passed and your final paper is in, I will not be doing any sort of rewrites or new grades or anything like that. If you're uncomfortable or anything, front load it. Meet with me ahead of time. Talk to me ahead of time. Set up a meeting, turn in a draft. But once the paper's in, it's in, and that's that. Any more questions? I think that covers everything I want to say. If anyone has any more questions, comments, concerns on paper writing, now is the time to ask. All right. In that case, I'm going to stop the recording and